there we go. So if we've got one of the church Bibles, then it's on page 1064. And we're starting towards the bottom of the first column, where there's the little 44. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy went and sold all he had and bought that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant looking for fine pearls. When he found one of great value, he went away and sold everything he had and bought it. Once again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was let down into the lake and caught all kinds of fish. When it was full, the fishermen pulled it up on the shore. Then they sat down and collected the good fish in baskets, but threw the bad away. This is how it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come and separate the wicked from the righteous and throw them into the blazing furnace, where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Have you understood all these things? Jesus asked. Yes, they replied. So he said to them, therefore, every teacher of the law who has become a disciple in the kingdom of heaven is like the owner of a house who brings out of his storeroom new treasures as well as old.
Thank you, Andy, for reading for us the reading. We're actually going to look right through to the end of the chapter, so beyond where our reading finished today, 52, we're going to go through to 58, but we'll look at that in a little while. But just before we get going, let me tell you a few jokes that I remember from the playground at primary school. So one person says to the other, my dog has no nose. The other person says, how does he smell? And the first person answers, terrible. He smells terrible. I thought everyone knew that joke. Okay, what about this one? Somebody says, my wife has gone on holiday to the Caribbean. Jamaica? No, she went of her own accord. I thought these jokes were better known than they are. What did the policeman say to his naughty tummy? You're under a vest. People don't know. Anyway, my point is sort of undermined a little bit, because I was saying the reason you're not laughing is because you think, oh, these old jokes, I've heard them so many times. But it turns out you went to a different primary school to me. So, familiarity sometimes means that we just get used to things. Years and years ago, I worked for 6 months in Africa, and for most of that time, didn't have access to a tap with running water. And it has enabled me to never take that for granted. It's something that it's very easy to take for granted in this country, that we turn on a tap and the water flows. But not everyone and not every place has that. And certainly in history, that's a fairly recent development, isn't it? Jesus' parables, as we read them in the Gospels, can be familiar. We can think, oh, I've heard about this treasure buried in a field before. And there's a danger in being familiar with something, isn't it? It can be dangerous that we don't value it. It can be dangerous that we assume we know what is being said. So this is a little reminder to listen carefully to what is being said in Matthew's Gospel, in chapter 13 here. You might find it useful to have that open in front of you. And to listen carefully and for us to try and hear with fresh ears, even if it's things that we feel we've heard before. Now, maybe you're thinking, well, I haven't really heard these things before. It is quite fresh to me. Maybe you're not usually in church. You're most welcome to be with us. We're thrilled you're with us. And I would say you're at an advantage in that way, aren't you? You're hearing things fresh. You're hearing what Jesus is saying in a fresh way, and a bit like the first people who heard it. Then in some ways, you're at an advantage to people who've heard these things many times or have thought about some of these things. I've got three things I particularly want us to see this morning, and they're all things that Jesus wants us to understand. So each one starts really with Jesus says, understand this. And we're going to see these as we go through this section. Understand what is valuable, says Jesus. Understand that choices have consequences. And also understand that thing I've just been talking about, that familiarity can breed contempt. It's a saying, isn't it? Familiarity breeds contempt. When we're very familiar with something, very used to it, we sometimes don't value it, sometimes even look down on it because it's so familiar. Well, let's look at the first one of those. Jesus says, understand what is valuable. So the first part of our section, verses 44, 45, 46, we get two similar stories. They start a little bit differently, but they do have some similarities. The result at the end of both the stories is an action that is very similar. In verse 44 and 46, the person who's discovered the treasure or the pearl makes every effort to possess what they have discovered. They make every effort to get it. Now, it's important just to notice that Jesus is saying the kingdom of heaven is like this valuable treasure that they make every effort to get. What does it mean by the kingdom of heaven? Well, it's being part of God's family is what he's talking about, having Jesus as king. So God's kingdom is everywhere that Jesus is king. You need a king to have a kingdom. And so he's talking about having Jesus king and being part of God's family. And that is the treasure here that Jesus is referring to. Now, the first person we met, that guy kind of stumbles upon the treasure, doesn't it? He's working in a field, it seems. It doesn't seem like he's been looking for the treasure. There's no mention of a metal detector. You know, one of these folk who walk around with the headphones on in the field. He seems to just stumble across it. There's an interesting verse back in Isaiah in the Old Testament, Isaiah 65 verse 1. I've got it on the screen for us. And this is God speaking. He says, I reveal myself to those who did not ask for me. I was found by those who did not seek me. Now, that's not always the case, but God there in Isaiah 65 is saying that can be the case, that he can reveal himself to people who weren't particularly looking. It can be found by people who weren't particularly seeking, and that seems to be the guy who finds the treasure in the field is a bit like that. I remember about 20 years ago when Lucy and I and the family were down at a church in Buxton. We had a big holiday club that was happening in the school holidays, sort of a holiday Bible club. Lots of kids came, both kids who were part of the church, but lots of other kids from outside the church, maybe families who were looking for a bit of something to keep the kids occupied in the school holidays, that sort of thing. And we'd had a great week, and on the Sunday we always had a big grand finale to the week's events, and we invited the parents of all the kids who come along to come and see what the kids have been doing, hear what the kids have been learning about. And I always remember there was a chap one year who, as the simple message of what the kids have been learning about the gospel message, the good news about Jesus, as that was explained on that Sunday morning, it was almost like he was looking around thinking, are you hearing this? This is amazing good news. This is brilliant. It was like he was hearing it for the first time. He wasn't normally in church, not grown up in going to church or anything. And that man within a few weeks was trusting Jesus. A few weeks later was getting baptized. And he was not looking, didn't really have any sort of spiritual inquiry going on in his heart before that. Almost stumbled upon the gospel, heard it and thought, this is marvellous news. And you maybe can think of occasions like that. I would say we long for them to be more common than they seem to be in the UK in these days. But it can happen, and on that occasion it did happen. And here, with this guy in the field, he stumbles across a great treasure. Now that's in contrast to the second guy. The second guy seems to really have been searching out and looking for this treasure, and the treasure for him is this fine pearl. Whereas the first guy was maybe just like a farm labourer or some sort of perhaps some sort of lower person in society. This guy is a merchant, not as a shopkeeper, I think, but some sort of high-up merchant travelling around seeking out this great pearl. And pearls were greatly prized in the ancient world. There's just like we saw that verse in Isaiah 65 that talked about how God reveals himself. I've got another verse for us in Matthew 7. If we can go on to that verse, thanks. Matthew 7, just a bit earlier in Matthew's Gospel, Jesus says this: ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be opened to you. Jesus also says, if you're looking for God, if you're trying to seek out what does God want for me, God's not trying to hide the gospel message from people. Seek it and he will allow you to find it. Seek him and he will allow you to find him. Now he's at work, God's at work obviously in both those situations. We want to pray that the penny drops for people, whether they're really seeking for God or they stumble across the good news about Jesus. But Jesus, in telling these two stories with these two different people, wants us to understand just how valuable the thing that they find is. I think for some of us here who are maybe familiar with the Christian message, it might be a continued source of amazement to us that people hear about the riches that there are available in the good news about Jesus, but prefer to continue in spiritual poverty instead. So there's great riches that are on offer in the gospel message about Jesus, but people prefer to continue in spiritual poverty. But not these two that we meet. They are determined, aren't they? No obstacle is going to be too difficult, no cost too high to them securing the treasure in the field or the pearl of great price. No change that's required will be too much. My boys enjoy a film. It's about 20 years old now, called Napoleon Dynamite. And in the film, which is about a guy called Napoleon Dynamite, here's our brother Kip. I've got a picture of Kip on the screen for us. Here he is. Kip's not the most dynamic of people, which is ironic because his surname is Dynamite, Kip Dynamite. But anyway, here he is. Anyway, Kip gets a girlfriend, meets a girl online. So this is 20 years ago, so it's way back in the early days of online dating. He gets his girlfriend, and she gets him to change a bit. Do you want to see what he's like after he changes? I've got a before and after shot. Here he is. He becomes big gold medallion. He's got the bandana on, and he's become a bit of a gangster. And he totally changes, and is very happy to secure the love of the girlfriend. No change is too great. Now that's a silly example from a film, but you see, these guys will to get this treasure in the field or the pearl. They sell everything. They're prepared to give up everything to secure that thing. Jesus says, do you see how valuable this thing on offer is? Do you see how valuable it is? Well, one final thing to notice as we think about understanding how valuable this is. They seal the deal. Both of them seal the deal. They don't faff about and lose out on the opportunity. The first guy buys the field. The second guy secures the pearl. There is a saying, and I think it's particularly relevant in our day. If it seems too good to be true, it probably is. And that's particularly, when you get the email that comes through that says, I'm this Nigerian prince and I've got 21 million pounds that I want to transfer to a UK bank. Could you help me? And, there'll be a cut in it for you or whatever. Those sort of scam emails that you get, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. But do you know what? The gospel message, it's the exception to the rule. It almost seems too good to be true. The treasure on offer in the gospel seems too much to be true. But it's priceless. It's priceless. And unlike the field, which has to be bought, or the pearl, which has to be bought, it's a free offer from God of forgiveness, of a fresh start with Him, of being part of His family. But it's priceless, says Jesus. It'd be worth everything. It'd be worth any change you had to make, anything you had to give up. It really is the deal of a lifetime. So that's the first thing I think Jesus wants us to see. This is valuable. But the second thing He wants us to see is understand that choices have consequences. And He goes on to tell this other parable, the parable of the net. Now, He's talking here about a dragnet, I think. Let me just explain that in its simplest form, and in some parts of the world this kind of fishing would still happen. You just need a boat and a long net, and the net will be weighted at the bottom and be floating at the top on the surface, and from the shore you can literally row the boat out, dropping the net behind you in a big semicircle and come back to the shore at the other end. And the weighted net drops to the bottom of the, say, lake that you're next to, and then you gradually pull in the sides of the net, and it's called a drag net, and it drags along the bottom, and anything swimming in that area that you've rowed round will be gathered into an increasingly small area. You'll be able to go down with baskets and collect all the fish or whatever that are there. Now, there's more advanced versions. You can have two boats. You can row in a circle out in the water. You can have longer nets. Modern-day trawlers have some sort of system where you can do a circular net and then tighten it at the bottom and pull things up and stuff. But we get the idea, don't we? And Jesus is saying that if things are gathered in this way, it just gets everything. You catch everything. There'll be things that are good for eating, but there'll be things that you don't want to eat, and things you think, what even is that? I'll throw that back. But Jesus' point is that there is going to be a separation. There is going to be a separation. A gathering and then a sorting. Now, it's very similar to the parable of the weeds that we had just earlier in the chapter in verses 24 to 30 that Nathan was helping us think about. The separation, he says, in verse 49, is to do with the wicked and the righteous. That's what this story is pointing to, the end of the age, and angels sorting the wicked and the righteous. Now, who are these righteous? Because it seems important to know, doesn't it? If we look back at verse 43, so that's just before the bit that was read to us, just at the very end of the previous section, it says, "Then the righteous," so there's our folk, "will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Whoever has ears, let them hear." So who are the righteous? Well, they know God as Father. They know God as Father. And that is very interesting in the light of what Jesus had told us back in chapter 11. So just keep a finger in our chapter and just come back to Matthew 11, a few pages earlier, page 1060. Actually, 61, because we're in Matthew 11, verse 27. Where Jesus says this, "All things have been committed to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and those to whom the Son chooses to reveal him." So not only do we find out that the righteous are those who know God as Father, but you don't truly understand God as Father without knowing the Son, Jesus. So again, this is really about having Jesus as King and being part of God's family, therefore, having him as Father. So that's who the righteous are. But when is this end of the age that verse 49 mentions? Well, there's one sense in which the time that Jesus is speaking is the end of an age, because it's the end of what you might call the Old Testament period, the period of the Jewish nation, and it's the start of the New Testament period. And of course, Matthew is the first book in the New Testament, and the age of Jesus coming, his incarnation, his death and resurrection, and then things being radically changed. Sometimes called the age of the Spirit or the age of the church. A new age is dawning. And in one sense, what Jesus is saying is talking about that. We've already seen earlier in Matthew of the struggle going on between those who are very much wedded to the Old Testament way of doing things and can't accept that the Messiah has come, and those who are starting to understand that Jesus is God's Son, the Messiah has come. Things are going to radically change. So there's a kind of sorting there, but I think ultimately this is fully fulfilled in future days, at the end of the ages, the end of days. And really this parable of the net comes as a flip side to the parable of the hidden treasure and the pearl. The hidden treasure and the pearl were warning us or reminding us of how great a treasure being part of God's kingdom is. But the net is reminding us of, giving us a warning of the danger of rejecting it. Not all fish are good fish. Not all people have accepted the good news about Jesus. And there's a great warning in verse 50 of the serious consequences of that. So be warned, says Jesus, choices have consequences. And in verse 51, Jesus says to his disciples who are hearing these things, have you understood all these things? And I think he'd want to say to us, have you understood these things? Have you understood these things? Interesting, they say yes in verse 51, but if you know much about the disciples, it's a slightly questionable response, I think, because they don't always seem to get it, do they? Have we understood those things? Could we say yes? And in verse 52, we get this bonus idea. Jesus says, to fully understand, you need to understand both the Old Testament and the New. He talks about becoming a disciple of the kingdom of heaven is understanding old treasures as well as new. It is the end of an age in a sense. Do you know God as Father? Is that limited to an Old Testament understanding? He would want to say to people in his day. Or do you understand God as Father through the Son, through the empowering of the Spirit? And if we're not sure, if we do, then we need to be like our friend the merchant, seeking out that great treasure, hunting for that pearl. Well, just finally, let's move on to just the final few verses in the chapter. Let me just read those for us from verse 53. When Jesus had finished these parables, he moved on from there. Coming to his hometown, he began to teach the people in their synagogue, and they were amazed. Where did this man get this wisdom and these miraculous powers? They asked. Isn't this the carpenter's son? Isn't his mother's name Mary? Aren't his brothers James, Joseph, Simon and Judas? Aren't all his sisters with us? Where then did this man get all these things? And they took offense at him. But Jesus said to them, a prophet is not without honor except in his hometown, and in his own home. And he did not do many miracles there because of their lack of faith. Just very quickly, the third thing I want us to see is Jesus says, understand, familiarity can breed contempt. Familiarity can breed contempt. Well, I came across this video, which we've got a... can we go back? Sorry. This video, which is called An American Reacts to Another Video, which is called Is This the Best City in England? And the video is all about Carlisle being the best city in England. And the American is watching the video, which tells you that Carlisle is the best city in England. A great watch. But the thing that is happening at this moment in the video, I took a screenshot, is he is seeing for the very first time a picture of Carlisle Castle. And because he's an American, and the oldest thing in America is probably the Empire State Building or something. But he thinks the castle looks absolutely amazing. He's like, wow, look at that castle. Absolutely fantastic. And yet we've built a bypass round the castle, haven't we? We've got a dual carriageway in front of it because we sort of are so familiar with it. So, no, it's just the castle. It's interesting seeing, the maker of the video, who doesn't live in Carlisle, and he's visited Carlisle. He's visited lots of places in the UK, and he thinks Carlisle might be the best city in the whole of England. And then the American, who's not familiar with England at all, he's thinking, wow, yeah, this looks great. What a fantastic looking city. It's brilliant. It's a very uplifting video. Anyway, but why it's amazing to us is because most of us live here, don't we? And most of us, it's just the castle. It's just Carlisle. It's just, the high street or whatever. It's just how things are. And some of us grew up here and it's just so familiar. Let me ask you this. Did you grow up going to church? Have you known the Bible for a long time? Did you grow up in a country that has a long Christian tradition? Christianity has been around for generations, maybe. Well, Jesus says there is a danger. There is a danger in that. Now, there's a great privilege in it as well. There is a great privilege in it as well. But there is a danger. In one way, you're in the best position to know about Jesus, to know the gospel, to know about the treasure. But there's a danger. Because familiarity can breed contempt. And we get this little curious incident where Jesus is in his hometown and people just say, well, it's just Jesus. Just Jesus. If you've never travelled beyond the UK, it's easy to not realise some of the great things we have in the UK. And I know many of us have come from other places, and it's easy when you live somewhere else to not realise some of the great things you have there. I mentioned earlier that I'd spent 6 months living in Africa. I was in what was then called Zaire, now it's the Congo. And some of the things that I observed there as an outsider was the great sense of community that there was in the place where I was staying for most of the time. There was actually a great joy in the people, although they were... there wasn't a lot of wealth around, but there was a lot of joy in some of the people. Among the Christians there was a great reliance on God because they had to. There was a great belief in God, just generally in the population, and a belief in that there's more to life than what we can just see and feel and touch. a belief in the supernatural. Some, as you came as a visitor, you could see some things that we've maybe lost a little bit in this country. Being very familiar with something can lead to contempt. So just pulling all these threads together then, Jesus wants to say, do you understand the value of the gospel? Do you understand the treasure that it is? Do you understand it's worth everything? Do you see the danger of ignoring it? As we think about the net and the sorting, do you see the danger of ignoring this treasure? And just very finally, at the end of the chapter, do you see the response in verse 58? What should have been the response of those people who knew Jesus? It says he did not do many miracles there because of their lack of faith. So what should have been the response? They should have had faith in him. They should have had faith in him. That was the response that they ought to have had. And that's the response we still ought to have to Jesus. We should trust him, put our faith in him. Now, do you remember I started with those old jokes, which turned out were quite fresh jokes, actually. But I started with those old jokes at the start. And I said, we don't find them funny because we know them so well. I was wrong, but anyway. But imagine that had been right. Imagine you went to my primary school. I said, we know them, so we think, well, it's just that old joke about Jamaica. Don't treat Jesus like that. Don't treat the gospel message, the good news of what is on offer in Jesus, of the forgiveness on offer, the opportunity to be part of God's family. Hear his loving instruction. Let's pray. Father, whether we're stumbling across this message like the guy in the field, or we've been seeking it out like the merchant looking for the pearl, I pray that you'd help us to understand what Jesus is saying. I pray that you'd guard us against over-familiarity with these things. And I pray that you'd help us to respond to Jesus with faith and to have him as our King. Father, I pray that you'd help us to value him above all things. Amen.